Welcome to Houseplant Parenting with Loudoun Master Gardener Pamela McGraw. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library and your host for tonight's program. Please feel free to type any questions or comments you have during the program in the chat box, and I'll be sure to pass them on to Pamela. And with that, welcome, Pamela.
Thank you, Lorraine. It's a delight to be here and be able to talk about something that I love doing, and that's growing plants and becoming a better houseplant parent. I'd like to begin tonight by telling the viewers a little something about myself. I've been a gardener for most of my life, and I have become a master gardener about 4 years ago by taking some courses through the Virginia Cooperative Extension, which pairs up with Virginia Tech and provides coursework as well as an internship, and I just learned a huge amount. And as such, we are expected to then turn around into the community and share what we have learned. And as master gardeners, we do that in a number of ways. We have a help desk at our office on Miller Drive in Leesburg, and residents can come there and bring in questions they may have or email us questions about plants, trees, pruning, lawn, the whole gamut of the gardening world, and we'll be glad to address and answer those as best we can. We also have garden clinics around the county. You'll see us over at Lowe's in the summer, out at the Southern States in Percival, and at the Leesburg Garden Farmers Market. And again, we'll have a booth there available for residents to come and ask questions that they may have about gardening. We also do speaking engagements like what I'm doing tonight for the library. We do them for private clubs and groups that are interested in garden and having sustainable gardening practices, learning what they are, how to better protect our environment through these management practices. So, and the last thing that we do is we maintain a demonstration garden at the Ida Lee Park. It is a wonderful place, and it is sectioned off into different types of gardening: drought tolerant, shade, butterflies, bird gardening, a large vegetable gardening, the produce for which goes to Loudoun Hunger Relief, and also a children's garden. So if you have kids this summer, be sure and come out and visit. The garden is open every day, all day. Master gardeners work there on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, but you're welcome to come at any time. So I'll just throw that invitation out. And with that, we'll get on with what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is houseplants. Now, many people might wonder, why do I want to go through the trouble of having indoor plants? Well, there are many good reasons. For me, it expands gardening options, particularly in the winter when we can't get outside to our gardens. It's wonderful to have greenery around you inside. It does improve air quality, and it just gives us a feel and a contact with nature that is missing when we can't be outside so much. Most of all, for me, it's just darn fun. And I hope it will be for you too. So just some basics that are needed, pretty commonsensical types of things. Obviously, you need a container, you need soil, you need fertilizer, you need to do a little bit of research about the plant that you want to grow. And most of all, importantly, you need to have the willingness to nurture it and have lots of patience, because houseplants, just like gardening in your yard, they do not always behave like you might want them to. They don't always grow as fast as you may want them to, and sometimes they don't grow at all. So patience is very important. And one of the reasons that plants sometimes don't do quite as well is you have to remember that most houseplants had their roots in the tropics. They like the tropical environments. They like humidity. In the tropics, they have the perfect soil mix. They have the right amount of rain, the right amount of fertilization, and other activity like with worms and so forth, nutrients in the soil that give them the perfect environment in which to grow. So we basically take them out of that environment and put them in our homes, which is nothing like that. We can hardly provide them with the humidity that many of them like. We sometimes can't provide them the light that they want. We are pretty inconsistent sometimes in how we water them. So a whole host of things that we try to do with houseplants just is diametrically opposed to what their natural environment is. And we have to be sensitive to that. One of the big things too is temperature in our homes. In the tropics, they enjoy very warm temperatures. In our homes, we go from air conditioning to heat, and sometimes in between. Nothing, windows open, windows closed, drafts on them, It's a wonder houseplants grow at all. Nevertheless, most of them are very adaptable with just a little care from us. First consideration, and the thing that I think is most important in growing houseplants, is location. It's not so much right plant, right place as the reverse. Right place, right plant. If you have the right location for a plant in your house, much easier to make a selection on the type of plant you want to grow. Now, in our homes, depending on how they are sited on our lots, you will see that light from the south and the west do provide the best location for plants. Now, those that can tolerate lower levels of light, and unfortunately that happens to be my home on most of the windows, north and east, but there are many plants that will thrive there. And with a little bit of help, maybe even artificial light at times, we can grow things that we might not otherwise be able to grow in our homes. But there are other considerations, such as if you situate a house plant in an area where a heat vent blows directly on it, obviously that plant is not going to appreciate that. If you have kids and the way they frolic through the house and use their skateboards through the house and do other sorts of things, are they going to be in the path of a plant stand? Is your cat going to decide that they would like to take a bite out of your house plant? Something you must be very aware of is the toxicity of a plant. And while I'm not going to touch on that specifically tonight, before you buy any house plant and you have pets, primarily cats, I don't think dogs are as likely to eat plants, but you would need to check in on that and make sure that you're not getting something that could be harmful to your animals. Containers. I'll just speak about this for a moment because there is a vast array of containers, way too many. It's almost overwhelming what the industry has done with containers. Every color, every material, ceramic, plastic, fiberglass, terracotta, concrete. But I will say terracotta is really the best choice if you want something that is at a good price point and something that every plant will appreciate, because water aspires through the walls of terracotta rather than holding it in like a plastic pot would. But most important, regardless of the type of container you choose, it is essential that it have drainage holes in the bottom. Just without question, the most important thing in making the selection of a container. I mentioned earlier about doing your homework, doing some research on the plants that you think you might like. Check in local greenhouses, and we are blessed with a lot of them here in this area. Just right here in Loudoun County, we have Merrifield Garden, we have Bluemont Garden Center, we have Meadows Farms, we have Abernathy up in Percival. So many choices in greenhouses, and it's fun just to go through and kind of get a feel for what size, what kind of plants appeal to you. If you do research online, I would highly recommend that you choose sites that end with .edu or .org. They have much more reliable information than most other gardening sites, and they are usually scientifically based in what they'll tell you about a plant and its needs. You can always check with friends, but keep in mind that we all tend to house plants a little differently. A plant that your friend might have success with, you may not. So I kind of just lightly take advice and from friends when they say, oh, that's a great plant to grow, or maybe it isn't, or I didn't have any luck with that, you don't want that plant. Kind of have to give things a try because you like the plant. So again, do your research, do your homework, look up and learn about a plant before you go and purchase it. Potting mix, there are many choices again on the market. What is important that you buy the best quality potting mix that you can. Obviously, you don't want to use garden soil. It's way too heavy. It's not friable, doesn't allow good oxygen exchange in the soil, good drainage. Potting mixes are typically very lightweight, and they have ingredients in them such as perlite, the little small white, look like styrofoam balls in the mix that help to aerate the soil. It'll also have a vermiculite, which are the little tan flakes that are kind of shiny, and those in the right quantity will help hold moisture in the soil. They will usually have some percentage of sphagnum moss in them, and they will drain well. So you want to get the best quality potting mix, My own personal favorite is the Espoma Organic Potting Mix or the Miracle Grow Potting Mix. A lot of them do have fertilizer included in them today. It certainly is not necessary, but it's not harmful either. After a few months of repetitive watering, that fertilizer that comes in the soil will wash out anyway. So wouldn't worry too much about it if the fertilizer you if the potting soil you purchase has fertilizer in it already. So where do you want to go to purchase? Well, my top recommendation would be a local greenhouse. But the downside to that is you're probably going to pay a little bit more for that. But in return, you're probably going to get a better quality plant, one that has been tended properly and cared for, one that has been watered properly, and hopefully will be insect and disease free, although that's not guaranteed. Now, the other alternative, and I've done this many a time, been walking through Lowe's or Home Depot, and I'll see they've just gotten a fresh load of houseplants in. And as I wander over there, they will have something that I'm interested in. And I have bought from big box stores with great success. Prices are a little bit more reasonable, I would say. But the problem with big box stores inventory is that all those plants come in on a trailer together. They're thrown together. They probably have not been tended. They've been watered, and that's about the extent of the care they've been given. So you have to be a little careful and be very selective. Inspect that plant very carefully. Don't overlook other options. I've been very fortunate in getting a couple plants on free cycle, because as people relocate, and they do a lot of that here in Northern Virginia, then they want to give away their plants. They don't want to have to throw them out. They can't take them with them, and often they will offer them free. The same with Craigslist. People moving, they will often offer their house plants at a very reasonable price. But regardless of the sources that you do choose to buy your plants from, be sure and be prepared for transporting them. If it's winter, you don't want to take a house plant out of a nice warm greenhouse out into the weather and into your cold car and then get it home without it, pouting a bit. So the best thing you could do, I would recommend, is take a dry cleaning bag, one of the clear ones, and just, pull it up around your plant and transport it home that way. If it's in the summer, obviously that's not a concern. A small paper bag sometime will do the same thing. Well, enough to cover up and protect your plant from the weather and the cold. Plant selection. Assuming that you've now determined where you want to put a plant, you might want to think about other things. What size container will that area accommodate? Be sure and read the label when you go to look for a plant. Read it in total. Most of them will have very good information, and if they don't, take the time before you buy to look that up and see, and be sure that you can provide what that plant needs. Take a list to the garden center with you if need be. If you're like me, once you get in a greenhouse, it's like a candy store. There's so many different plants there that are just beautiful, and you may not have them all. And, you may end up buying the wrong thing or buying more than you need, more than you can take care of, more than you have a location for. And you don't want to do that because plants are expensive and they're getting more expensive. And you want to look at it as an investment and spend your money wisely on something that you can maintain. So you've purchased your plant. First thing you do when you get it home is you want to check it carefully for insects or disease. Make sure there are no little webs around on it, that you don't see any little bugs underleaf, mostly on the bottom of the leaves. You don't want to see any spots on the leaves. If you see a little browning along the tips of the leaves, that's not terrible. It's not necessarily indicative of a disease. It may just be the plant has been overwatered, underwatered, not having the right humidity. But one thing that is good to do is kind of tap that pot on its side and check the root ball. Kind of pull the root ball gently out, look at it, and make sure that those roots are not bound up and tangled together. If they are, carefully with snips, cut off maybe a ½ inch of the roots on the bottom completely, and then loosen the remaining roots so they tend to go out into the soil rather than continue to be wrapping around themselves. Repot it in new mix, water it thoroughly, be sure that the water comes through the pot into the bottom. Another good reason to have holes in the bottom of the pot so that you can see when it's watered thoroughly. Then you place it in its new container, in its new location, and you can expect to see it acclimate for a couple months. Sometimes they'll drop a few leaves. Sometimes they'll droop a little bit until they get used to where they are. Maybe they're not getting quite as much moisture or light as they're used to. And just keep an eye on it for a few months closely. I wanted to tell you about this wonderful book, and it's from where I got the concept of a plant parent, because Daryl Chang, this author, does a wonderful job of explaining the similarities between parenting a plant and parenting a child. Many of the things we do, the attention we give, the care we offer, the food we provide them, are all similar, whether it's a plant or a child. And so this book does a wonderful job, and it will encourage and inspire you. So I encourage you to get your hands on a copy of this. The library does carry it. And check it out and read it. The illustrations in it are just delightful. But if you can't do that, he does have a YouTube offering on many aspects of plant parenting, and he's very interesting to listen to. Caring for your new plant. Many people keep a strict watering schedule on their plants. My schedule is I'm going to water once a week. Typically that's on a Sunday. But what I do vary is the amount of water that each plant gets. I have violated my own rule about holes in a pot on occasion, and I've had a plastic pot that did not have holes in it. And when I've done that, you have to be even more observant to make sure that the amount of water you're putting in a pot can be absorbed by the plant at intermittent water intervals, for me, within a week. You want to do your watering consistently. If you establish a once a week, then you need to keep within that once a week with maybe a one-day variation. Another good thing to do is to aerate the soil in your pot. If you use chopsticks, and they are great little tools for this task, and just gently push them down in the soil around the plant, opens up the soil for better drainage, better aeration, and the plants will definitely benefit from it. Obviously, in grooming your plant, you want to remove old or dead leaves. Some plants, just as they grow and age, will naturally drop some of their leaves to make way for new leaves. It's nothing to be concerned about, but nobody wants to see a plant with a dead leaf on it. So just make it a regular practice to remove those. You want to fertilize regularly. The next slide will talk more specifically about that. And once again, take the time to really look at your plant. Examine it carefully. Make sure that there are no infestations of insects for any reason, or that it's not looking unhappy. Signs that you will be able to pick up the longer you have care for houseplants. Fertilizer, which is preferable? I like the slow release fertilizers that are water soluble. They're very easy to just put in with the water that you're going to water with, and I generally do it once a month, with the exception of the winter months. Typically, houseplants even will slow down a little bit of active growth in the colder months. We don't get as much light and sunshine in the windows, so they just kind of slow their growth a bit. So you don't fertilize when a plant is not in active period of growth, and that usually starts back up as the weather warms and the days get longer. Okay, my favorite part. I had to surprise myself when I went around and counted how many houseplants I have, and they numbered 45. Now that may seem extreme, and it probably is, but as long as I can take care of them well, I don't fault myself for loving houseplants. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I thought, why not share from my collection photos, because those are the plants I know best. They are also easy to take care of, and anyone can be successful with them. And I guarantee you that is everyone. It's not true. It's a myth that some of us have green thumbs and some have brown thumbs. It all boils down to how well you take care of a plant, how well you educate yourself, and take the time to learn about what a plant's needs are. So, without further ado, I'll begin to introduce you to those plants in my collection. I have divided them up into several categories, the first of which are tropicals. And some of these you will be familiar with, and some perhaps not. All of these like sunshine, They like humidity, will benefit from a spraying every once in a while. The first of these is a croton. This is a plant that I wouldn't necessarily have bought, but like many of us, a friend gave it to me, and I have grown fond of it. Right before she gave it to me, she ended up pruning it right on the main stem, as you can see. So what did it do? It sprouted two additional stems, and now it's grown taller. I love the variation in the leaf. It's a lovely plant. Doesn't take up a lot of room because it tends to grow more narrow rather than spreading. It does like humidity, and it does like to be kept moist. Next is a stromantha. This is a plant that I threw out almost twice. I'm glad I kept it because when it finally decided to settle down and stop dropping leaves and stop drying up, and I gave it the right exposure, it developed into this lovely plant. The backs of the leaves are red, and yet the tops are this beautiful cream and green variation. And the other thing that's fun about this plant is at night, it completely folds up in itself. And then in morning, when the sun and the light comes back to hit it, it comes back out like you see it now. It's a lovely plant to have. A bromelade. You don't often see these in a home, but I highly recommend them. They're very easy plants to take care of. This little guy began in a 3-inch pot. I had him out on my deck for 2 summers, and last summer, I bring them in every winter in the fall late, but when I brought it in this past fall and I looked at it and I thought, oh, that's got to be completely pot bound. I took it out and it was. So I put it in a larger pot, and you can see it rewarded me with this beautiful bloom. These plants don't have to be watered, but maybe once every 2 weeks. And even then, it's best to water them right down in the center of the plant, which is kind of like a receptacle for the plant where it grows from. Hibiscus, most of you are familiar with these plants. They have the big, huge yellow, red, pink blooms in the garden center in the spring. Most people use them through the summer and then toss them out or onto the compost pile in the fall, but it is possible to bring them inside. My goal with the hibiscus over the winter months is just to keep it alive. I don't expect it to thrive. I typically cut it back, which this one has been cut back when I brought it in the fall. And what it will do in the spring when I put it back outside will reward me with many, many blooms. This particular one is yellow. It likes a lot of water. I will also mention the little yellow butterfly that you see in this pot is there for a purpose. It is to catch any soil gnats that want to fester in the soil. Any plant that likes to remain moist will no doubt at one time or the other have soil gnats. They really don't hurt anything, but they can be just a little bit of a nuisance. And so this is a preventive measure. If you put these, there's like a sticky tape, and a gnat is drawn to the yellow, and they will adhere themselves to the little sticky tape, butterfly in this case. And then, you know, every couple, 3 months, you can remove it, put a new one on there, sometimes longer. It just depends. They're very helpful as a good preventive measure. And the last I'll mention is a sago palm. I've had this guy now for about 10 years, and he is one that is transported outside during the summer months because he loves the humidity. But I am able to sustain him well in the inside, but as you can see, he's quickly outgrowing his space. I can't bring myself to do anything more with him except to just enjoy him, because every fall, about the time I'm ready to bring him back in, he shoots up 3 more fronds. And so he's expanding his territory, and I'm a bit worried, but I surely do like him. Bright light inside, he enjoys humidity. So this is one that I do spray on occasion. Otherwise, just the regular watering regime once a week. And the last is an alocasia. I had to have this plant. It's grown from a bulb, and it's in the elephant ear family, but its leaves are just so graceful and just a beautiful plant. The leaves are almost, they're very smooth, but they're almost leathery, and they have these beautiful gradations of color, cream all through them, and it's just a lovely plant. Now, please note the little saucer that it's in. While this pot had a hole in the bottom, it did not come with a saucer. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money on saucers. I usually pick mine up at thrift stores for $1 or less. You can almost always find them in a color that goes with the pot you have. and they do a fine job with keeping water off your tables. The next category are ferns. I want to say something about ferns. Most people think they're a little finicky, and some of them are. For instance, a Boston fern, asparagus ferns are the most common, and they're great outside in the summer in hanging baskets, and they're very beautiful. But when you bring them in the fall, they are very unhappy. They drop their leaves, they drop some of their branches, they shrivel up, and they're not so pretty, and they make a mess. So I have relegated them that if I want, in particular, those two types, I will enjoy them outside and not bring them into my home, particularly because there are many other options for ferns. One being this delightful little ribbon fern. This was two very small plants I bought about a year ago, put them together, and it has grown quite a bit. And these leaves, or fronds actually, are very curvy and yet a very shiny, beautiful green. And I've grown very fond of this ribbon fern. It doesn't even need to be misted. It doesn't need the high humidity. It just likes to be kept evenly moist in a bright light. It's kind of bright where it's sitting now because I happen to have this one under an artificial light just to keep it happy because I've run out of space in front of my windows. This is another little fern that falls into that same category. It's just a delightful little fern that makes me smile because on all the stems are these little round button-like leaves. And it seems to just take care of itself with regular watering. I don't even fertilize this plant. It's never shown me that it needs it. I have often used this as a small centerpiece during a casual dinner party, and it's a beautiful little touch of green. These are some other ferns I have. Those in the background were bought and put into container plants with annuals and perennials outside. But when fall came, they were doing so well I couldn't bear to throw them out, so I potted them up and brought them inside. I'm not even sure what variety they are. I'm not too concerned about it either because they're quite lovely. But the one in the front I know to be a curly fern, rightfully named because all of its little fronds are very curly. He remains indoors all year round, and he does benefit from a light misting. Most all of the ferns like to be kept evenly moist. They do not like to dry out, and they like medium to bright light. This next category are called pedestrians. That may seem negative, but I don't mean it to be. I simply mean that they are plants that you will often see people have. They don't consider them particularly attractive necessarily, but they're hardy, and so they're worth mentioning. One being English ivy. This probably is a grandma plant, but hey, it's certainly worthwhile. I had this started outside, and again, as the fall came a couple years ago, I potted it up and brought it inside, and now it has grown considerably, and it's such a delicate, lovely hanging plant that I enjoy it a lot. With some ivies, you have to be careful. They seem to be prone to spider mites. I spray all my plants when I bring them in from the outside well in the fall because you never can tell what's lurking either on the foliage. I also treat with a systemic insecticide in the soil in case anything has laid eggs in that soil. You certainly don't want to be bringing that into your home. Another type of ivy, and I apologize that this one is a little bit lighter, but this is a variegated ivy that's very dainty. I have this in one of my guest bedrooms, and it doesn't require a lot of light. This one sits about 3 or 4 feet from the window, but it certainly is a pretty little plant, and I'm very fond of it. And because it's such a simple little plant, it's okay to use a more decorative container. Most of you are probably familiar with the spathiphyllum. This is a very common plant that you see often in malls, very easy to take care of, and it's often called a plant for beginners. If you're going to get one of these, I recommend that you get one that is a very reasonable size rather than a starter plant because they are pretty slow to grow and fill out a pot. But they put these wonderful white spath blooms out that no one can resist, and the leaf foliage is a beautiful green. Again, a plant that needs a good bit of moisture. It will droop if you miss a watering, so it will let you know if you have not given it due consideration in the watering department. Again, another pretty simple plant we all see a lot of is a philodendron. But if you want a hanging plant, as it is on this stand, then this is an ideal plant to have. They come a good variety of colors, some with variegation, some that need a little bit more light than another, but they're very hardy. I would say most people would not be able to kill this plant, and it's also a good choice for the home. This next category, one might have to be a little bit more picky about, give maybe a little bit more attention to, but they're well worth having. I call this category the unique category, such as this ponytail plant. He's kind of an odd looking fellow, looks like he had a bad haircut, but nevertheless, he's in my husband's office and he's quite fond of the plant. He waters it every 2 weeks. You'll notice this large ball at the bottom because this is a succulent, meaning that it holds that as a water reservoir. So consequently, it doesn't need to be watered so often. It does like very bright light, but it's quite happy. As you see, it's put out a little sprout down there on the lower level near the bulbous part of it. And except for a little trim on the ends of the leaves every once in a while, it doesn't require any special care. It's just kind of a fun plant. This plant is quickly becoming one of my favorites. This was gifted to me by a friend. It is called a beefsteak begonia, and I've learned after doing some research that it's a rather rare plant to find. Its leaves are just beautiful, and I understand that her Uncle Albert gave it to her many years ago, and that the parent plant that she now has is over 50 years old. This little plant was given to me, wasn't quite this large. It's grown quite a bit since I've had it, and it blooms. As you can see, those blooms are kind of going out of the picture, and it's not really the blooms that you would grow this for because they're kind of insignificant. It would be for the foliage and just those lovely big leaves. And because it has a downward motion or growth on the leaves, you can see I've raised it on a small platform or pedestal to give it a little bit of a lift so that those leaves are not dragging on top of the table that I've placed it on. Lovely, lovely plant, as are many begonias. I'll be showing you a few more of those here shortly. This is a pilea, another just a fun plant that brings a smile to your face. It looks so frivolous. It's got these beautiful round green leaves, lots of them. It readily puts out little babies at the base of the plant. It likes bright light as well. Moisture a little bit on the light side. It does like to dry out before it's rewatered. And this is what I mean about varying the amount of water you give your plants. You might water them all once a week, but be careful with how much you give each one, and be sure to notice what it's doing in response to how much you're giving it. Next is a bonsai schefflera. This plant was also gifted to me, as many of my plants have been, as you've heard, by my son. It's kind of outgrown the bonsai look, and as I get my courage up this spring, I've promised myself I'm going to take my snips and I am going to reshape it into a proper bonsai and then hope for the best. I understand they're very hardy, and I'm trusting that that is true. I will mention one thing of interest. You'll notice that the pot seems very small because in a bonsai, the idea is to keep the roots trimmed and close, and it limits the growth of the plant, keeping it in a smaller size. It is not planted in soil. It's planted solely in stone, small stones, and it is fertilized very infrequently. But as you can see, it's very healthy and thriving. And again, it's just a fun plant to watch. Orchid, the last one of uniques, and one that I have never tended. I think they're much too finicky for my taste and my time. However, this one I picked up at the grocery store a year ago, and after it finished blooming, I cut it back, but I loved the leaves on it. They had a beautiful shape in and of themselves. So I put it in the laundry room, behind the washing machine, up on the windowsill, even during the winter. Poor thing, it's a wonder it even made it. But come spring, I saw that the aerial roots were starting to develop. So I took it out of that place, put it in a new pot with the orchid bark it likes to be planted in, put it in a warm location, and lo and behold, a month ago, there that stem came out, and now I am rewarded with this beautiful little dainty bloom. So I don't plan on throwing it out anymore. I'm going to properly parented. This is a newer edition. Jury is still out on this guy, but I liked him. I liked the leaf pattern, and that is its natural bend of the leaves. It's not that it needs water. It doesn't. It can take a lower range of light. It was moved into this location temporarily so I could get a picture of it for this presentation. But I loved the variegation on the leaves, and I liked its shape. It's a good size for a house plant, not huge and overwhelming in a room, just quite a nice accent. This is a new plant too that I've had only a couple years. It's a ZZ plant, becoming ever more popular these days, and I highly recommend it. I bought this plant when it was about half this size, so it's put on a lot of growth, and it has this kind of a cone-like shape to it. The leaves are dark green and they're very thick and leathery. However, it doesn't need any care especially. Every 2 weeks watering it is all that it needs. It prefers to completely dry out before you rewater it. When I first bought it, it had a couple of new shoots coming out that were kind of a lime green. And then as they get out and open up and the leaves appear, it changes to this dark green. This is a wonderful plant. And you can see why it's called ZZ plant, because who can say Zamioculcas? Something like that anyway. And I will have to confess that when I tried to find one of these in the greenhouses, they were beyond my budget. I happened to be in Lowe's one day as they had unloaded a group of plants, and there he was. I had to bring him home, but I did watch him very carefully, and I guess I got lucky because he's really thrived. The last category are succulents. Well, next to the last category. Succulents are plants that hold their water, usually in their leaves, such as the jade plant. If you ever had one of these, you know the leaves are kind of cushiony, and they do not need a lot of water. They prefer to have soil a little bit on the dry side. If you look closely at this plant, you will see that the tops have very tiny little leaves, and that is because about a couple months ago, I thought it was getting a bit leggy, and so I clipped them all back, and now I've got all this new smaller growth that will help in filling the plant out. It's a fun plant to have. This is a Haworthia, another succulent, because the leaves are very fleshy. It has very small spots on it, and it's a perfect size for the window in my kitchen. It's a interesting little plant to watch. It doesn't take much attention or water. Again, a fun little plant. This is the only plant in my collection that has a name, and his name is Butch. He was gifted to me by my son. As you can tell, Mother's Day, birthdays, Christmas, often it's a house plant, which is fine with me. But Butch is not a cactus, even though he looks like he could be. He is actually a succulent called a euphorbia. He can be prickly, and is, if you grab onto him, you wouldn't want to do that. And I might add, this is not a plant you would want to have around too close to where children would be or animals. He requires very little water. Once every 2 weeks is fine, and he grows very slowly. I've had this plant probably 10 years, and he has probably just only doubled in size. Quite a beautiful, interesting plant. Lots of interesting little crevices and growth habits on it. Fascinating. If you want to try your hand at succulents and you have perhaps a broken bird bath, a lot of people will have one part of it broken and you have the top part left, you might want to try something like this, especially out in the summer. To fill it up with soil, cover the top with gravel, plant your succulents in there. Do be sure it has drainage in the bottom, because succulents will not tolerate wet feet and standing in water at the base. But you can see a combination of many succulents have been used, most of which can easily be brought in the colder months as winter and fall approach, and it would do fine inside until the next spring. I think that's a lovely job what they've done with that, especially for a group. Very, very different types of succulents in there. So the last group is called mainstream, because a lot of people think, oh, everyone has one of those. But again, they are worthy of speaking about because they are pretty easy to take care of. They're not demanding. They're very hardy. It probably will not surprise you that the first one is the snake plant. Snake plants have come a long way because there are many, many different varieties of them now. This happens to be a lovely variegated one whose margins are this beautiful bright yellow and this rich green in the middle. This snake plant is also called mother-in-law's tongue, which I find very distasteful, but nevertheless, that is its nickname. And these are wonderful plants to have. Another variety in a smaller miniature size is this variegated snake plant. You can see the difference in the size of the leaves, and it will always be smaller than the one that I just showed you, but just a really pretty plant. And then the more typical snake plant that you find is the totally green one, as this one is. Snake plants are easy to care for. The one thing you will need to be careful is that you do not overwater them. They do not need a lot of water once every week and a half, perhaps, which means that if you do it every week, you only give them a bare little bit, and they will get along just fine. I wanted to also and you've probably seen it on some of the other pictures I've shown you. It is a clear plastic saucer, but I have put in it either pebbles, or sometimes the little colorful beads, because as the water drips down into that from the pot, it does provide good humidity around the plant, and it looks pretty, and I like that. And so it kind of gives it a more finished look. The Rex begonia, you will see these in the garden centers come spring in many variations, many leaf patterns. They're becoming more and more popular, and many people plant them as annuals, but they can easily be sustained in the house as a house plant. Let's say you buy a couple for to plant in your garden outside, then come fall, you could easily pot them up, spray them off, check them for insects, bring them inside, and then use it as a house plant. As you can see, this one has beautiful pattern on its leaves. This is another one that I've had for several years, both outside and inside, and I bring it in every year. It has gorgeous pink blooms on it in the middle of a summer, but it's grown primarily for its leaf pattern, and it's just beautiful. I have a mostly shaded patio, and it's just fine. It's perfect location there, and it just thrives in the heat. This is another begonia that I had potted up with other annuals and perennials in a container outside. But again, cool weather came and I couldn't bear to throw it out. And so I potted it up and thought, well, I'll see what it does. Well, it's done quite well. And so it will be going back outside after Mother's Day, probably in another container with some annuals around the base that will kind of fill it in. But this will be the point of interest plant in that container. Its leaves are lovely. Reminds you of the angel wing begonia, if you're familiar with that. But also in the angel wing family is this little guy called a frosty. I splurged and bought him last summer, and then when summer came, I really ran out of places I could bring more plants in the house, and so I just took a cutting. And then you can see from 2 leaves, he's gone to this many leaves, and he's quite pretty. But I suspect that he is going to always remain kind of a miniature, but he's just a delightful little plant. Norfolk Island pine. This is one that I got off of Craigslist. Somebody was moving. I think I got this for like maybe $10, and it had a wonderful heavy clay, but hardened clay container that it's in. And the pine grows very slowly. It will drop fronds like you see at the edge of my rug there, but has this rich green color, very easy to take care of, prefers the drier side and just some bright light. And I do rotate this. Many of my plants at the windows, I do try and rotate so that they grow a little more evenly. It just helps them to be a little happier. Most of you are probably acquainted with the spider plant. These were very popular back in the 70s. Everybody had them. They're very easy to grow. They put out the little spiders on the stems. It's a great hanging basket. Has beautiful variegated foliage. Likes a lot of bright light. Likes a lot of water. Before I end tonight, I just want to share with you a few display ideas, because part of having houseplants is to enhance your home. I think this was just an ingenious idea someone came up with. They took an expandable metal trellis, put it up on the wall with some pegs at the top, and then began to train their philodendron from the table beside it up onto the trellis. and it's almost a work of art. Just a really ingenious way to display a plant. There's something to be said for putting houseplants in groups of three. Not only do they enjoy each other's company and benefit from that humidity and aeration between them, aspiration between them, I should say. In this particular case, you see they've got light sources from both locations. These plants will no doubt thrive. They've also carefully bought and provided them and planted them in identical containers. So there's some continuity between them. They look like a proper grouping. And so does this, I might add. A more rustic look mounted on the wooden stand, probably a log, with the clay pots. However, I think it's a little unfortunate because the positioning of these plants, it's very unlikely they'll be happy there long, because you can see from the window, they're not getting a lot of light. Certainly no direct light, certainly no sun. My hope is they have some overhead light that they do use on these plants, because like this, they will be pretty for a very short period of time. They will not thrive in that environment. So don't ever feel like you can just put plants in a bare corner because your corner is bare. If there's not a light source there and you can't provide it either artificially or by natural light, plants are not going to thrive. They do thrive, however, as I mentioned, from being close to one another. That's how they are in nature. They grow upon one another in the tropics. They're so thick you can hardly get through. And while I don't recommend that, close proximity to one another, they do look very pretty. And they do enjoy that environment. So, in conclusion, make sure you have a willingness to nurture your plants before you dive into houseplant parenting. It's a lot of fun, but it does take a bit of time. I think it's well worth it. It's most enjoyable and a hobby for me. In closing, I will just say that success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. Consistency in watering, consistency in checking your plant, singing to it if you'd like. There are days that I go back and I will say, boy, you are looking good today, Mr. Fern. And just being a part of your plant's life and enjoying them. And remember, we all kill plants. They die. Sometimes we don't know why. But mistakes are a good learning tool. So don't ever get discouraged just because you may lose a plant or two along the way. Instead, focus on enjoying being a plant parent. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That was excellent. And I've got if it's okay with you, I'm going to get right to them.
Sure.
If you're going on vacation and you're going to miss a watering cycle or two, is there anything you can do?
Yes, you call on a good friend.
They have someone mentioned those little things that you put in the plant and they release water more slowly. Do any of those work?
Well, I think if it's a small or reasonable sized pot, they may work for a week. I really feel like it's best to find a plant friend, and I do. I'm fortunate that I have several. And even with 45 plants, she has offered to come over. I'm getting ready to go on a cruise, my husband and I. And so I'm going to be gone for 15 days. And she's going to come over twice during that time and water for me. And that's really the more guaranteed way of your plants surviving in your absence.
Okay. How often do you need to replace the soil?
Only as a plant outgrows its container, I would say, or if you determine that you are suspect that it has some kind of disease developed or that it is overtaken by insects for some reason, it's always good then to take the plant out of the pot, get as much soil off of the root ball as you can and put it back into fresh potting mix. But typically, I do not repot unless the plant is showing signs of stunted growth or being unhappy, or I just know it's been in that pot for 3 years and it's got to be pot bound. So just take a read on what your plant's telling you. And if worse and you doubt and don't know, turn it over, pull it out of the pot and take a look at the root system.
Okay. And do you just putting any organic material into the plant?
I use just the potting.
crumbled leaves, anything like that?
Not inside. Outside, crumble leaves are wonderful additives to soil, but inside, no, I would not use anything like that. I would use sterile potting mix just because too much of a chance with bringing in
Bugs.
disease or
Yeah,
insects.
yeah, yeah. Do you recommend a humidifier or spraying periodically enough?
Well, as you've heard me mention in here, I do spray occasionally on some of them. I don't make it a regular thing because I choose plants that are a little bit more hardy and don't have those special needs. I'm sure they appreciate it when I do walk by and grab the sprayer and do that, but I don't do it as a regular practice. Neither do I have a humidifier, except for when I am growing seedlings. When I start my seeds every spring for my annuals, then I up and amp up the humidity with a humidifier, but not for just regular house plants. Nope.
Do you recommend any plant care smartphone apps?
For houseplants, no, not particularly. I'm certainly not opposed to them. There's a lot of good information. Again, I think you have to be careful who you're listening to. Some of the tips are not always scientifically based or best care practices. And those, as I mentioned, are best identified with the addresses with .edu and .org and rather than .com.
Okay. How long should tap water sit before using to water a plant?
Probably 24 hours. I don't always use tap water. I think it's a good practice. Sometimes I forget to sit it out, and I have to use a lot of it. So the gallon jugs do go a long way, towards setting them out the night before and then in a day or two and using that water. I think that's ideal. I don't always hit the ideal, but the plants don't seem to mind. So,
Wow. Um, Lisa, I think we answered your question, but the second part was I've heard that some plants prefer to be pot bound. Is that correct?
I do think that's true. Some plants do. Typically, most plants don't, but neither do they need a lot of soil around them. Typically, a plant doesn't need more than about a half to 1 inch of fresh soil unencumbered with roots within it. And it just needs about that little bit of room around it to thrive. And again, plants will kind of let you know when their growth is stunted or you're not seeing much new growth in the spring, for instance, given normal care routine, and you're just not seeing them put on much new growth. That could easily be because they are pot bound.
Okay.
But the only real way of telling that is to pop it out of its pot and look at the roots.
Okay. If you have well water, do you need that to stand for 24 hours as well? And why do you have to have tap water stand for 24 hours?
Well, tap water, because of the chlorine and other things that are added into our drinking water. And with well water, much of it is very high quality, high content of iron. And so by letting water sit, it kind of weakens those components in both of those types of water. But again, I'm not real picky about that. I have used both without letting it wait 24 hours, and I don't think I've had any demise of plants or harmed them in any important way. So I'm not real
Maybe if you
funny
have a
about that.
filter on your water, you don't need to let it sit as long. Would that be correct? Because you're
That
filtering
would be
out.
great. I don't personally have that.
Yeah.
I do on my drinking water, but typically the water for my plants comes out of the tap.
How can you tell if you've watered enough or not enough?
Well, you want to water until it comes through the whole of the pot, because you can be sure that then the entire soil, root ball and soil is watered. And again, don't water in one spot, water around the entire rim of the pot so that you can make sure that water reaches every part of that soil. But you do want to water until it drains out the bottom. And once it drains out the bottom, you don't want to let your pot sit in that for more than an hour or so. And then you'd want to empty the tray or the saucer it's in.
Okay. Is it okay to top with new soil at times?
I've never
Because
found
it's
that necessary on a house
okay.
plant. Outside with garden plants, I do that with compost, but inside I do not do that. if a plant needs to have soil refreshed, then it ought to be the entire pot.
How do you take care of lettuce plants which started growing in water?
I have no idea. Vegetables are not my strong suit because I don't have a sunny yard, and so I don't grow many vegetables. But that's a good question for our help desk. You can find that address under Loudoun County Master Gardeners, and the help desk has a tab on that website, and you can send that question right into them, and I'm sure they know.
Do you have a slide with that information again, Pamela? Did your first slide have the contact information?
You know, it doesn't have the,
okay.
You can simply type in under Google Loudoun County Master Gardeners, and that site will come up.
Okay. Any more questions? Renee followed up. You said when she asked how you can tell if you've watered it not enough, you said you want to
I'm sorry, you broke up, Lorraine. I couldn't hear that question.
every time you water, you want to make sure that it comes out from the bottom?
Yes.
I think I got to all of them. If I didn't, oh, what is the name and author of that book?
Daryl Chang.
Spell Daryl, please. Is it D-A-R-Y-L?
D-A-R-Y-L. Daryl and Chang, C-H-E-N-G. It's becoming a house parent. Becoming a house plant parent. Yeah.
Typed that in the chat box. What do you do for brown tipped leaves?
Well, I usually trim them off, but just because I don't like looking at a plant that has brown leaves on tips on it like that, but it's usually an indication that perhaps the plants, it could be that it's getting too much light and that's tending to crisp up the ends of the leaves. On occasion, it could mean that plant's getting too much water. So you have to try a few things after you learn about what the needs are for that specific plant. But some plants just are more likely to do that. And so I just simply trim that off from time to time. When I see that on the leaves, I'll just spend a little extra time with my scissors, my plant scissors, and just trim that right off, and keeping the shape of the leaf. I think that's most important, to maintain the natural shape of the leaf if you're going to do any trimming like that along the edges.
So many of our heating systems are so dry. Could that cause a little browning on the tips?
Sure. Yes. Lack of humidity. Sure. Yeah.
If my plant leaves are turning yellow, is that a sign of too little water?
It's most likely overwatering. Unless the plant is extremely dry, it would be unlikely. You would more likely see a plant the leaves begin to wither a bit or shrivel. Turning yellow is usually an indication of overwatering. I'll tell you, it would deserve a session of its own to talk about all the ailments and the remedies for plants, because they do vary quite a bit. The best thing to do is to just carefully observe your plant and do some research, and then try the few things that are suggested.
So I went to a plant store and they had beautiful pots, none of which had holes in the bottom, but they would pot the plant themselves, and they would put a lot of like gravel or little stones in the bottom, and they said that is just as good. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think it's just as good. I do think it is adequate in some occasions if you are careful to watch and learn exactly how much water your plant needs, but that is trial and error. I'll just mention that there is a bit that one can buy that will easily bore through a ceramic concrete plant pot. My husband has done it many a time, and although you're just a little panicked watching that, go into the pot, he has successfully done it with the correct bit. They're not extremely expensive bits either, and they can easily be used with a typical drill, and just open up those holes at the bottom. It's worth the effort and the time to do it.
About the size of a dime, for a regular size pot.
Several.
Yeah.
Yes, several.
Uh,
In a small pot, one would be fine, but then as the pot gets larger, you would want to have more than just one.
more than just one hole. Okay. Um, should we repot plants out of the plastic containers they come in?
I don't let it stay in those plastic pots long. Number one, I don't like the look of it unless it's going in a basket. There have been occasions if I have felt that the pot is properly sized for the plant. It really doesn't need potted. Now I've checked the root ball. It's not root bound. I may leave it in that for a time and maybe put it in a basket, but not for long. I just don't think plastic is the best element. There are many choices now in those plastic pots, but I think that question is probably directed at the green ones that they typically come in. And so for those, I don't leave them in there too long.
I recently saw a suggestion to use coffee on a snake plant to perk it up again when it wasn't looking healthy. What do you think?
That probably came from one of those sites I'm telling people not to look at. It's grandma's tip, an old wives' tale, no scientific basis whatsoever. However, I would suggest they put their coffee grounds out in the compost. Hopefully they have a compost pile and that, or they can spread them around their plants outside. I would not put them on an indoor plant.
Any more questions? This has been terrific. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Good. I've enjoyed it. Thank you. I hope it's beneficial.
Oh, I think so. I think
Good.
we're all really excited about adding to our plant collection now. I know I am.
Wonderful. Good.
Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you next time.